Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 667 for the 18th of July 2021. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia, where the last few days have been not good. It's been very cold, very windy and very wet. But, of course, more importantly, the Delta variation of the COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon, and the numbers are getting worse, sadly, over the last few days, and the lockdown restrictions are tighter. And it's eerily like reliving parts of 2020 all over again, except there's a bit more of a serious element to it. Not that last year wasn't serious, because of the Delta variation. I guess we can keep our spirits up. We need to get motivated to do lots of exercise if we can, even though it's a cold winter and a lockdown winter, as it's turning out to be. But things like that to keep one's self active. But speaking of the lockdown, the first news item coming up on today's show, the first segment, talks about protests in the city of Melbourne against their lockdown. They've gone into lockdown too because of the Delta variation. Yes, people are out on the streets, were out on the streets protesting, the usual suspects, the freedom fighters, the Liberty Now, COVID is a hoax, and on it goes. And I recorded this segment a couple of days ago, and just yesterday I noticed here in Sydney, not far from where I live, there was a protest and some people arrested for the same thing. Anyway, coming up at the top of the show, news about the protests in Melbourne. And after that, we speak to a couple of very interesting gentlemen. My old friend Leonard Tramiel from the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and in Sydney, Australia, Ian Bryce. Both these gentlemen are involved with various money challenges for skeptical prizes for proof of the paranormal and so on. And I thought I'd chat to them both. I had the opportunity. And what you might find interesting is the slight differences in the Australian $100,000 prize and the Centre for Inquiry's $250,000 prize. And in order to prepare you, what would you think if somebody came up with proof of alien contact? Do you think that would qualify for the Skeptic Prize? And after that chat, we have the latest newsletter from Australian skeptics, written and compiled by Tim Mendham. What has caught the skeptical eye of Tim this week? Then to round off the show, back to the Trove archives, where we look for references in the digitized newspapers and so on for the word psychic and the word test in the same article. Well, one of the positives about the lockdown is you get to see some pretty good entertainment online. And last night I enjoyed our reporter Maynard. He did a live broadcast about the Castanet Club, the famous group that was around in Newcastle in the 80s and the 90s. If you don't know anything about the Castanet Club, head to maynard.com.au, download the Castanet Club free calendar, and also, in your diary, put down 8:30 p.m. Saturday night. So that's next Saturday, and that will be the 24th of July. And that's Australian time. So 8:30 p.m. this coming Saturday here in Australia, and you can do the time conversion for wherever you are in the world. Go to maynard.com.au and watch part 2 of Maynard's online live show about the Castanet Club with clips and interviews and music, and it was a really good hour's entertainment just last night. Well, now it's time for me to run downstairs, and since it's winter I might make myself up a bowl of porridge. Not too cold, not too hot, but just right. Porridge and brown sugar. Now there's a combination. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Now, as I said at the top of the show, Sydney and Melbourne are now both in lockdown owing to the coronavirus, the Delta variation or variant or strain or however they're saying it. And I must say both cities are taking it in their stride to an extent. They have different rules in each city, which is a bit confusing. I think it's more confusing in Sydney because the rules aren't as clear. But on Thursday night just gone, Melbourne went into lockdown. And that very night, after it was announced in the afternoon, protesters hit the streets. Now these are the anti-lockdown, anti-mask, freedom fighters, Liberty Now, COVID is a hoax, etc. protesters. And it truly brings home to me, and I'm sure it does to you too, that these people simply don't understand this is the Delta variation. This is the Delta variant. This is a different game. This is truly highly infectious. People are becoming infected after very casual contacts, and the numbers are growing. And on Friday morning, this appeared in the news.com.au website, written by Matt Young, and it says in part, anti-lockdown protesters storm Melbourne hours after Daniel Andrews' announcement. Daniel Andrews being the Premier of Victoria, the man who calls the shots in that state. Melbourne has been plunged into chaos just hours after the state entered its fifth lockdown, as hundreds of protesters took to the streets. And incidentally, I will link to this, of course, this page, which has lots of photographs of the protests and videos, and it's so stark that the police on the scene are all wearing masks, and the protesters are not. And it goes on to say there was chaos in the streets of Melbourne overnight, just hours after the city entered its fifth lockdown, as angry protesters marched through the CBD. And CBD stands for Central Business District, for those people in other countries who don't use that term. So it's downtown, in other words. Demonstrators called for an end to the restrictions just hours after Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews announced the state would enter a 5-day snap lockdown from midnight. We've got to do this, otherwise it'll get away from us, and we, as more than any other part of our nation know, we don't want this thing getting away from us and being locked down for months. Mr. Andrews said, "We want to deal with this with a short, sharp lockdown, decisive action, not waiting, not dawdling. Now is the time." Later on, it says, maskless protesters display their anger. Protesters filled Melbourne CBD from around 7 p.m. to oppose the snap lockdown in a city that has seen its fair share of COVID restrictions. Signs read, "I have a choice," and "Lockdown kills," with many demonstrators not wearing face masks. And it goes on to say they were chanting freedom. And to give you a taste of what it was like, here is a brief audio clip. It also mentions an actress from the TV show Neighbours, popular here in Australia and in the UK especially. Actress Nicola Charles, known for her role as Samantha Beaumont in TV show Neighbours, also hailed the protests. One protester on social media described lockdowns as human rights abuses and called for a great turnout, bragging that there were a couple of thousand people here, claiming that they were just regular everyday people who have had enough. And it goes on later to say Victoria Police told news.com.au no arrests or fines were issued. A flare that was lit during the protests was still being investigated, with police saying they were yet to identify the person responsible for lighting it. Protesters gave speeches, then marched to Parliament. So yes, that's an interesting story, worth a look, especially when you can see all the photographs of the protesters and some video footage as well. Well, this brings home to all of us, I think, the importance of fighting these conspiracy theories when we see hundreds, probably hundreds of people marching in Melbourne last night, not wearing masks, crying freedom and human rights abuse and end the lockdown and COVID is a myth and all the rest of it. And I seriously hope these people don't have to suffer the effects of the Delta variation. Although, it must be said, of all the people in our community more likely to get infected, it's the people who don't believe that there is an infection out there in the first place. And it crosses my mind that some of the more important work the skeptical community and associated friends are doing these days is to fight conspiracy theories, because at the heart of all this, I think, is conspiratorial thinking. I mean, we still like to cover the classics, the UFOs, the paranormal, the ghosties, spoon bending, all that sort of stuff. But when we get serious about it, fighting misinformation, especially in this day and age with a deadly virus sweeping the world, I think what we do is, frankly, more important than ever. I will link to that story in this week's show notes.
Hi, I'm Ben Radford, co-host of Squaring the Strange podcast. In these trying times, as we help each other out to hold on to hope, we want you to know that we're here for you.
Hey, what are you going on about?
Who's interrupting my heartfelt promotional copy?
It's me, Celestia Ward, your co-host. Really? In these trying times? That's the best you can do?
Well, I'm just doing what everyone else is doing. I thought...
That's not what we do.
Oh, for crying out loud, who else is here?
Pascual Romero, your other co-host?
Hey.
We don't do what everybody else does, Ben. That's kind of our thing at Squaring the Strange.
Yeah, we try to approach things a little differently than your standard skeptical talky talk show.
We do our own thing, bringing science, critical thinking, and skepticism to bear on issues of the day. We've got a professional skeptical author, Ben, who has decades of experience researching topics for 12 books and thousands of articles.
And a cartoonist skeptic, Celestia, who knows her stuff when it comes to facial weirdness and the psychology of perception.
And a badass heavy metal rock star and tech engineer, Pascual, who brings knowledge of all things audio, plus a bunch of neck tattoos.
Squaring the Strange explores topics both mysterious and mundane through a critical lens. Monsters, panics, media literacy.
Okay, forget the whole trying times promo idea. But we have chupacabras and clown panics, right?
Yes, Ben.
Story of my life.
The story of
magic of editing.
The magic of editing. It's Leonard Trammell, it's Adrian Hill, and Ian Bryce here in Australia. They're joining me this week on the Great Australian Prediction Project, but I couldn't let the opportunity go past because Leonard and Ian are two kindred spirits, because both gentlemen are involved in the skeptical prizes from around the world. Leonard, you were telling me that you are involved with the Centre for Inquiry's $250,000 prize for what exactly?
Or any paranormal or extraordinary ability that a person has that can be shown to exist under proper scientific observation.
Exactly right. And Ian Bryce from the Australian Skeptics, you are the long-time challenge coordinator in this country, and it's only $100,000, but I wouldn't mind having that. And I guess we look at more or less the same sort of thing, Ian.
Yes, indeed. It started off as being for the paranormal, but of course these days it's broadened into medical and scientific claims as well. And my own specialty is in claims relating to physics, such as energy storage. And energy production is a major one now.
Right, and you've investigated, since I've known you over 20 years, many claims of free energy and zero-point energy, or what's the term I'm looking for?
Cold fusion?
Eternal energy? No, quick, somebody help me.
Perpetual motion?
Thank you, Adrian Hill. Perpetual motion. I just couldn't think of the term. Leonard, would you, at CFI, would you consider claims if somebody came up and said they've invented a perpetual motion or a free energy device? Would that fall into your categories?
In most cases, we are looking for an ability of a person
Right.
not a device that they construct.
Or
So
even
probably not.
that's interesting. So even though this device, a free energy device, contradicts the laws of physics, it's something that you would probably pass on.
If we have some leeway, but strictly speaking, we're talking about supernatural abilities.
Right. That's interesting. And where would both you gentlemen place claims of aliens and UFOs and things like that? Ian.
Yes, I think, Richard, you've handled most of the alien and UFO claims. There are some very interesting ones, aren't there? Some of you might have heard of the UFO alien abduction from, when was that, 30-odd years ago? That was one of the most famous Australian cases.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if somebody came along to us and said, I can prove that aliens exist or UFOs exist, does that fall within our prize money?
Well, that's a good question, because it wouldn't break any laws of physics. In fact, I think most scientists would agree that it's quite likely there are aliens out there that we haven't made contact with yet. So, but my own understanding is that anything new to science would qualify for consideration, because I'd hate to turn down, if someone came to us with offering an introduction to an alien, I'd hate to think that Australian skeptics turned down the opportunity for such publicity and goodwill. So I'd extend to anything new to science.
That's interesting. And Leonard, what would your take be on it? I guess someone would have to come to you, and the claim would be they could make telepathic contact with aliens.
Yeah, it would have to be some ability that they have, as
Right.
opposed to just something that exists.
Well, in this country at the moment, it's a little difficult, especially in Sydney, for us to conduct, and it has been over the last, since 2020, to conduct our normal tests and so on and so forth. What's your situation, Leonard? Are you involved in many claims for the cash prize?
I'm not one of the more active investigators, but I have coordinated some of the claimants. The first one that I got really involved with was someone who claimed that he could dowse for gold, take a pendulum, and detect whether or not there was a gold thing nearby. After painstaking analysis and thinking of every possible way of handling this, we constructed a protocol, and he tried it, and he said, "Oh, I can't do it. Sorry," which we called a win.
Well, that's a story we've heard many times, Ian Bryce, where people come to be tested, and somehow their magical powers elude them.
That's right. Well, of course, many of them claim that skeptics put out negative vibrations, which cancel it all out. So perhaps there's some truth to that. But I have here a little device, which is perhaps one of the most mystifying. This is a little pendulum, and Richard and I went and visited the gentleman in the Southern Highlands many years ago.
We
you
did,
might remember.
Yes, I do remember. What Ian is holding up, incidentally, is a metal pyramid, and from the center, at the top of the pyramid, is dangling a second rock, which looks like a little pyramid.
Indeed, a pyramid within a pyramid. So where could that go wrong? Anyway, the chap had a theory of physics, his own theory of physics to back it all up. And then he showed us a demonstration, and he sat one of these on the floor, and it sat there, and for half an hour the little pendulum wobbled back and forth with no wind currents and no one moving it. Do you remember that? And it was very mystifying.
Did you get to the bottom?
He said, "You're free to search the house. Everyone suspects that I've got some vibratory machine in the house which is doing it, but you're free to search the house." So we did, and didn't find anything. And he said it works in the garden too. There are some rocks in the garden that it works on, and some it doesn't. So we found one outside where it sat there and swung for 20 minutes, and other places where it wouldn't. So that was never resolved.
Oh,
he
dear.
says, "Here, you can have one of these." So he gave me this, and I took it home to my own house, and it switched back and forth regularly or frequently But my house is very old and fragile and moves in the wind. I can feel it moving, so that's no mystery here.
Ooh.
But he never followed us up. He never demanded the money, and we never resolved it. So that's the one solved regarding Australian Skeptics' $100,000 challenge.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, thanks for this brief chat. It's great to have these little side chats when we're doing the project, because I find the whole idea of the challenge quite fascinating, being involved with the Australian Skeptics $100,000 and the James Randi $1 million. And, well, let's just hope somebody can come along and make telepathic contact with aliens and their pyramids.
As one of the people that's involved in the challenge here says frequently, I really want this to be true because I want a Nobel Prize.
That's the argument, isn't it? We'd all do very well out of it. Well, Leonard and Ian, keep it up. It's fascinating work, and thank you for this little chat.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, Leonard and Adrian and Richard.
Hello, this is Maynard. Did you know that you can listen to the Skeptic Zone on YouTube? Yes, I know, sounds crazy, but it's true. Also, you can hear 40 logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma and funny sketches with Richard Saunders and a host of other skeptics. Just click on the YouTube links on the homepage at skepticzone.tv.
Let's look at the Australian Skeptics newsletter number 127 for the 12th of July 2021, and written and compiled by Tim Mendham. Hi, all it says. Not a great deal going on, except for your opportunity to register for the Here and There and Everywhere Skepticon 2021. And more about football than there is about COVID, which makes for a pleasant change. Read on, Tim. Skepticon. Register your interest now. Registrations of interest are now open for Skepticon, the 2021 Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention, which this year will be held on November 20 to the 21st. It will be a joint event held by Australian Skeptics here in Sydney and New Zealand Skeptics in Wellington, New Zealand, with face-to-face and online participation available. The caveat is COVID willing. And this is an important point to make, that we here in Australia especially are planning for all contingencies. So we hope to have some face-to-face and online, but COVID might dictate that it goes completely online. We don't know yet. Anyway, you can keep up to date. Details of the speakers and ticket prices will be available soon. But in the meantime, please register your interest at skepticon.org.au so you can receive the latest info. The next item says, flawed study cited by anti-vaxxers. A study that erroneously claimed that the COVID-19 vaccination causes 2 deaths for every 3 lives it saves has been retracted from the journal Vaccines after researchers and editors found a drastic, quote, misrepresentation of data, end quote. The main argument of the study was that, quote, this lack of clear benefit should cause governments to rethink their vaccination policy, end quote. The paper was quickly used by anti-vaxxers as evidence that the vaccines are not safe. Facebook flagged the video as containing, quote, partly false information, end quote, but it has since been viewed over 250,000 times. The study has also been tweeted by anti-vaccination activists with hundreds of thousands of followers. Benjamin Franklin's fight against smallpox. And when you thought anti-vaxxers were bad in 2021. Interesting historical piece on variolation, a treatment for smallpox used before Jenner's discovery of using cowpox, and promoted by Ben and his big brother Jimmy. And incidentally, Benjamin Franklin sometimes wrote under the pen name of Richard Saunders. Malaysia's influences cash in on health and beauty pseudoscience. Dubious health claims, such as a banana milk that it is claimed could regulate insulin production, and a string of incidents involving adulterants, have led to observers calling for greater due diligence as regulators strain to keep up. Malaysia's National Pharmaceutical Regulation Agency listed no fewer than 171 health and beauty products that it had found contained banned ingredients, including poisonous mercury and tretinoin, an acne and leukemia medication that carries a wide range of side effects, from skin irritation and hair loss to birth defects in unborn children if used while pregnant. And I have never seen that word before. Tretinoin. Tretinoin, I think it's pronounced. Ancient skepticism for modern problems. When an opinion is formed, our minds will work to defend it against contrary notions, arguments, and reality itself. This looks at the application of Epicureanism and Stoicism in modern-day situations, and its reference to Athenian corridors, athletes, and gods in the September issue of The Skeptic. And of course, to remind you, each of these news items comes with a link. You can click to read more. The newsletter also talks about upcoming events in Adelaide, Victoria, Gold Coast, Perth, Canberra, and Sydney, including Sydney Skeptics in the Pub, which next month will be online because of COVID, with our special guest speaker, Professor Paul Willis. Skeptics in Action. If you have any ideas for stories or want to contribute to Skeptics communications, such as the magazine or Facebook page, or just have something you want to get off your chest, then you're welcome to get in touch. And you can write to the Australian Skeptics with your news tips at skeptics.com.au, or submissions to the magazine should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Items of interest. Further to last newsletter's story on animals picking the Euro results come some more examples of furry and feathered and finned football fanatics. A caveat: we haven't been able to find predictions by all these for the final game. Spoiler alert. And few, if any, ever give the actual scores. But here we have Chao John, the psychic chimp from Thailand, who successfully predicted England's victory over Ukraine, but were unable to find any prediction for the recent final. Eva, the psychic parrot, also predicted the England-Ukraine match. Willow, the psychic kakapo, again the England-Ukraine winner. Beatrice, the rescue cat from the RSPCA, Santa chose the England-Ukraine result. Jessica, the psychic chicken, predicted England's win over Denmark. Various meerkats, named after characters in Friends, predicted England to win the final. Wrong, of course. Corby, the psychic tortoise, predicted an England win in the final. Wrong. R2-D2, the psychic sausage dog, was likewise wrong. And Banana the seal went down the same drain. Wrong. Not known is how many Italian animals voted, and sadly, there don't seem to be any psychic koalas yet. Probably fast asleep and stoned on eucalyptus oil. Susie the pig, who had a pretty good record until the final, failed like all the others. Stepping outside of the animal realm for a moment, there were high hopes for a psychic banana, but they got it wrong as well. Oh, Tim, where do you get these things from? And in the human arena, a psychic bum reader passed her verdict on the England team ahead of the Euro 2020 final, convinced that 3 lions have a, quote, really good chance, end quote, of beating Italy. That was an obvious bum steer. Ugh. Uri Geller put his mind to the task of an England win and failed. And there's more to read in this newsletter, but finally we get to Movie of the Week, or whenever it comes out, Ghosts of Borley Rectory. Story of England's most haunted house. Looks exciting, with Colin Doctor Who Baker and Toyah 80s pop legend Wilcox, and probably also overly sensational, as opposed to your editor's disappointment when he went there and found it had been knocked down decades earlier. So much for research. Well, thank you Tim Mendham once again for compiling the Australian Skeptics newsletter, and you can have that delivered to your inbox every other week by subscribing at skeptics.com.au.
Hi, this is Dr. Pamela Gay from Astronomycast. Each week, Fraser Kane and I take our listeners on a fact-based journey through the cosmos. With our weekly podcast, we explain not just what we know, but how we know what we know about this universe that we share. Check us out at astronomycast.com and look for us in iTunes, Google Play, and wherever you download podcasts. See you online.
Let's take another trip into the pages at Trove, trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia. Digitised newspapers, articles and so on, going back for many, many decades into centuries. And continuing our theme, looking up psychics, psychic animals last week, psychic this, psychic that. We're going to take a closer look at references to psychic tests. Or at least articles where the word psychic and the word test both appear. And I guess like me, you may have noticed that the name Sir Arthur Conan Doyle seems to crop up quite a lot in these reports, and today is no exception. We begin our look this week in the pages of The Journal, which was from Adelaide, South Australia, published on the 9th of July 1923. Psychic Lights Comedy. New York has been smiling broadly at the results of an investigation into psychic phenomena conducted by the Scientific American, which on the occasion of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's recent lecturing tour offered prize amounts to £1,000 to mediums able to satisfy certain tests. The chief candidate for the prize was George Valentine of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, who has frequently produced the, quote, psychic lights, end quote, described by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. At the request of the medium, tests were made amid darkness, so intense that it was impossible for the judges to even see their own hands. Unknown to Valentine, however, the chair he occupied rested upon an electrical contrivance, which ignited a bulb in the adjoining room the moment it was vacated. By means of a dictaphone and a stopwatch, an observer posted there was able to record the exact time and the text of every utterance by the, quote, spirits, end quote, evoked by Valentine. The record shows that, concealed by darkness, Valentine vacated the chair 15 times in the course of the séance. His chair was always vacant when the psychic lights appeared. When voices were heard in different parts of the darkened room, or when those present felt on their faces and hands the uncanny touch of ghostly hands. Ooh, a bit of a giveaway there. And that was in 1923. And now we turn to the pages of the Australian Woman's Weekly, a very popular women's magazine, and this country for almost a century. This comes to us from 1979, Wednesday the 5th of December. 1979, oh yes. I remember those times and how popular things like ESP was, probably spurred on by Uri Geller and things like that. It was just the time. Is your child psychic? Do psychic bonds exist between you and your child? A new book, Is Your Child Psychic? By Dr. Alice Tanos and Catherine Fair Donnelly includes a number of tests you can conduct with your child to see if he has telepathic, clairvoyance, precognitive, or other psychic abilities. I guess if it's a she, you're out of luck. I don't know. Sorry, I thought I'd interject. The following two tests are taken from that book. They are for telepathy, and each uses a deck of cards. Getting half of the answers right is a chance response. Getting 60% or more is beyond chance and would be considered a significant response, say the authors, or could just fit within the bell curve, says the skeptics. Sorry. The tests should be played as games. They should not be done all in one sitting, and the child should not be made to feel this is an exam he has to score well on. Psychic abilities, even when they do exist, cannot always be summoned at will. I keep interjecting. Psychic abilities, and then there's a hyphen, even when they do exist, cannot always be summoned at will. Apart from all the psychics I've met in my life who said they can do their psychic ability anytime, anywhere, and then can't, but that's another story. Sorry, back to the article. Jack and Ace test. Use only the 4 jacks and 4 aces from a deck of cards. Shuffle the 8 cards, then pick up the top card and look at it, but don't show it to the child being tested. Say the word target and concentrate on the card for about 5 seconds. The child then says whether he thinks the card is a jack or an ace. Don't tell him whether he was right or not, but silently mark down whether he did or did not hit the target. When he announces, "Ready for the next target now," repeat the procedure on the next card until the test has been tried on all 8 cards. Go through the entire procedure 2 more times, each time reshuffling the 4 jacks and the 4 aces before starting the run anew. In 3 other separate sittings, repeat what you have done in the first sitting until you have a record of your child's having tried to read your mind on a total of 100 cards. Finally, tally up the score to see how many of the child's answers were on target. Basic red or black card test. This is done the same way as the previous test, except that you use the entire deck, and the child has only to tell you whether he believes the card is red or black. This test should take place in at least 4 separate sittings of 25 cards each. I wonder if anyone tried it way back in 1979. They probably did. And next we find ourselves in the year 1932, the 2nd of February, and we read from the Cessnock Eagle and South Maitland Recorder, and this is in New South Wales. Psychic research in Australia. The reading public are showing great interest in the investigations of the special committee arranged by the, quote, Sunday Sun, end quote, Sydney, to investigate psychic phenomena. The committee comprises 2 lawyers, a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and a wireless expert. Several seances have been held and messages received from people in the astral plane, but the committee is hampered in its work by not being able to find a medium capable of producing materializations. Messages are all very well, and interesting tests can be made, such as getting the spirit to mention what is being printed at the moment on a particular line and page of next morning's paper. But after all, what people are fundamentally interested in is the sight of living ghost forms. I'll just pause there. Living ghost forms. Let's read on. There is no parallel in Australia for the exhaustive researches of Professor Gelly, the greatest authority on experiments with wax gloves, which give the most conclusive evidence of materialization, and those of Reichert and Schrenk-Notzig. But the Sun Committee hopes to find some good medium able to produce these results, for the finest proof of spiritualistic phenomena are obtained with wax gloves and by photographing ectoplasmic forms at different stages. And there you go, there's some good advice for us all. Wax gloves. Now let's go further back in time to 1909. In the Sunday Times from Sydney on the 3rd of January. And if you're interested, that's on page 3. Psychic phenomena under test conditions. Live bird and nest passed through mosquito netting. More Bailey wonders in Melbourne. The second occult test seance conducted by Mr. T.W. Stanford, Melbourne, with the medium Mr. Chas Bailey, took place at the private office of the former on Wednesday night, there being present about 25 investigators, including an American gentleman, Mr. McLeland, who is making his second tour around the world, having on a previous tour visited Egypt, India, and other places where he investigated occult phenomena and kindred matters, and learned much of the subject of spiritualistic mysteries. This gentleman was one of the searchers of the medium, who entered the mosquito netting cage described in my last communication on the subject. He was a member of the Committee of Detection for the evening, and besides carefully searching the medium, he examined the cage and locked the medium within, holding possession of the key during the hour and a half the meeting lasted. He, with others, also attached initialized stamp edgings on the door in such a way that it could not be opened without tearing the paper. That's interesting, and I'll just say as an aside, one year at the amazing meeting where we had to seal a room, we taped up the room and wrote our signatures across the tape, which was an interesting experiment. At the conclusion of the meeting, he and his colleagues pronounced the papers to be intact, and the cage perfectly sound at every point. These preliminary facts are important and, furthermore, are stated with perfect fidelity to truth. The first article passed through into the cage was a lump of clay, with spearheads buried in it, said to have come from Central America. This, quote, apport, end quote, was about the size of a breakfast cup. The next article brought was an old parchment manuscript, said to have come from Egypt. A little later on, the Hindu control said it had been promised that articles similar to those which had been brought from time to time before the cage had been introduced would be produced under the new conditions in order to prove that the phenomena could take place under the most strict conditions as well, and while the medium was sitting at the table. It had been said, the control pointed out, that while at the table the medium had had articles passed to him in the dark by some female sitter acting in collusion with him. The present test series had been decided upon in order to provide an answer to the people who took this view of the occurrences. After making a statement to the foregoing effect, the control announced that the medium had been searched before entering the cage by 4 of the sitters, and even if he had been able to conceal about him a live bird, which of course was impossible, it would have been smothered during the interval of 1 hour that had elapsed since the medium had entered the cage. The light was then placed in the box provided for that purpose, when it is required that the light shall be excluded for about 2 minutes. The room was in complete darkness. At the end of that time, The lamp was taken from the box, and the sitters saw in the hand of the medium a perfectly formed nest with a bird sitting in it, being apparently asleep. The control said the creature would wake up soon, and so it did, moving about, struggling in the hands of the medium in a vain endeavour to get free. After the seals and lock were examined and found to have been undisturbed, the door was opened so that a cage for the bird might be passed into the place where the medium sat, and the bird and the nest were taken home later by Mr. Stanford. And I'll just pause there to say this is fascinating in so much as it describes a run-of-the-mill stage magician's routine. Well, I don't want to say run-of-the-mill. I mean, they're all very clever and very spectacular, but still. The third séance, conducted by Mr. T.W. Stanford, Melbourne, with Mr. Bailey as the medium, took place on Wednesday night, December 30, and the results were as mysterious as previously. The medium was in the cage as before, the door being locked, with the crevices covered with initialed and stamped paper. The cage has a solid wood floor, while the roof and sides are of mosquito netting. A thorough examination was made before the medium entered, and the two examiners, one a visitor from America, pronounced the enclosure to be intact. The first article landed inside the cage was a lump of clay similar to that previously brought, and it contained spearheads, said to have belonged to prehistoric times in South America. The second article brought was a fabric of woven grass, said to have served as a piece of hanging in front of the doorway of an Indian mosque. It was examined by an Indian control in regard to this, that whereas silk hangings are used in many of the rich temples of the cities, the poorer places of worship in the outlying parts were adorned with materials made of grass. This article measured about 8 foot long by about 18 inches wide, and would bulk about as great as a man's Beaufort coat, and could not possibly have escaped observation by the searchers had it been concealed about the person of the medium. In addition to bringing these articles, the various controls offered a very eloquent prayer, sung hymns, and delivered an able address based upon the earthquake catastrophe in Sicily. Melbourne representative of the Sunday Times. And once again, it seems to me that was a very good and interesting act of the time, posing as paranormal ability. And finally, we find an article that asks the big question, are you psychic? And this was published in the Gippsland Times in Victoria on the 26th of August, 1950. Are you psychic? Until recently, scientists have done nothing but scoff at people who claim to have psychic powers. But now they are discovering that 1 person in 5 has some degree of second sight. Stories of prophecy, mind reading, and the ability to see through walls or across thousands of miles of space are no longer dismissed as idle gossip. They are eagerly sought after by serious-minded researchers, experts at 6 US universities, and scientists at Oxford and Cambridge. They are clues to yet another psychic, and science wants to know all about them. Last month, a young woman sat at a desk in a psychic research office in New York, looking at a magazine advertisement. She leaned back, clicked a stopwatch, and noted the time. At that moment, 3,000 miles away in London, another woman turned to a group of scientists who were watching her intently and said, quote, "A small pony." The advertisement the young woman in New York was looking at was designed around a drawing of a pony. Pioneer work. Experiments like this to probe the unknown world of mental telepathy and other twilight powers of the mind are taking place every day. And now, after 20 years of pioneer work by a few scientists, research into extrasensory perception points to a remarkable conclusion. I'll just pause there to say that's interesting. 1950, and they used the term extrasensory perception, ESP. I wonder when that term was first used. It's certainly not used now. We read on. Some people, as many as 1 in 5, have an additional sense that works spasmodically in their subconscious. It is this sense that enables them to foretell a future event, read another person's mind, no matter how far away, and see through walls, doors, and other visual barriers. But this does not mean that every story Aunt Millie tells about her premonitions is a true example of psychic power. Many claims false. America's Psychical Research Society has found that 98% of claims to psychic powers are false. This huge proportion of inaccuracy and imagination in trying to track down real examples of second sight is the greatest single problem facing psychic research scientists. But every now and then they come across a story that does suggest a psychic element. Here is a typical one. A 3-year-old boy named Billy was playing on the floor at home with his parents one afternoon when he suddenly stopped and walked towards the window. He wasn't tall enough to see out of it, but he said sadly, "Aunt Helen isn't coming." The time was 2:30 p.m. Billy's father was about to tune into a wireless program, and he could vouch for the exact time of Billy's remark. Billy's parents laughed at him because, as far as they knew, his Aunt Helen was in her home 100 miles away. They hadn't seen or mentioned her for months, and they were not expecting her to call. Psychic ability. The next day, Aunt Helen telephoned to say that she'd been driving past the house the day before on her way to another town. She had meant to come in on a surprise visit, but she'd looked at her watch and decided she did not have time to stop. It had been 2:30 when she drove past. In a case like this, psychic research scientists prepare a special set of questions for the people involved. If the full facts, as related by several people relevant to the story, could not have been coincidence, mistake, or imagination, they make further tests on the person with the apparent psychic ability. The scientific checks are mainly carried out with a pack of special cards called ESP, Extrasensory Perception Cards. Card test. ESP cards have 25 in the pack, 5 showing a circle, 5 showing a star, and so on. The psychic person sits on the far side of a room, hidden from the man conducting the test by a screen. In a simple mental telepathy test, the psychic subject is asked to name the cards the experimenter is thinking about. To test ability to visualize an object at a distance, clairvoyance, the experimenter might ask the subject to name order of cards in a blank envelope. To test ability to foretell the future, precognition, the subject would have to state the order of the cards after they had been shuffled. The cards would be shuffled mechanically. The packs changed frequently. Thousands of subjects have been tested in this way, and to cancel out the possibility of guesswork, some subjects have been tested over periods of days, even weeks. There are always certain people who score higher than mathematical chance allows. This means that psychic power really exists. What is it? Some critics maintain that the scores achieved in these tests are no better than mathematical flukes might produce, but the US Institute of Mathematical Statistics has analysed the results of several researchmen and has fully approved of their precautions against coincidence giving an apparently psychic result. The psychic research scientists make no claims about their work, merely emphasize a great deal more research is necessary. Although many more scientists are becoming interested in psychic research, none is prepared to state what this uncanny power really is. Some think it might be remnants of a primitive sense that operated among men before they could speak. Biologist Julian Huxley thinks it may be a new human capacity still in its earliest stage of development and evolution. All psychic research scientists agree that the power is a strange mental combination of the flow of time and the concepts of the physical world. Most psychic exchanges occur between people who are close friends or members of the same family. And there we'll wrap it up for this week, looking into the trove reports for psychic and test. And I think I've mentioned before, there are many reports through the years of so-called psychic tests or demonstrations, and I just wish I could have been there. I really do. Maybe with some of my magician friends. Birds appearing through mosquito nets, and nests as well. What a great use for psychic ability or paranormal powers. Next week on Trove, we'll be looking at another angle, another reference, another avenue into the world of the paranormal. And you can discover all that and much more by visiting Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, and you'll never know what you'll find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Coming up on next week's show, in the Trove segment, we look at psychics and police. Psychics and police. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at skepticzone.tv via PayPal or Patreon. And sort of like last year, at the moment, since all my other sources of income have stopped owing to the pandemic, I can't do the live science show I normally do. I can't do my acting and other work that I normally do. I've lost some other work doing video production and audio production. All gone. So I am very grateful, you can imagine, to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone. And if you've never done it, why not give it a try? What have you got to lose? Well, a little bit of money each week, hardly anything. You can chip in for as little as $5 a month. $5 a month. And if you're in the United States, by the time the money conversion happens, that equates to about $8 or $9 here in Australia, and that helps very much. Well, I certainly hope by the time next week's show comes around, I can tell a happier story from Sydney, Australia and Melbourne about the COVID numbers. But we don't know, because as we have discovered a long time ago, you cannot see the future. Not in this case. Anyway, until then, until next week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Yes, it's the dice game, folks. It's the Easter egg at the end of the Skeptic Zone. I have a 6-sided round die here from Kelly Burke. She sent that to me. Can you believe it? And together with a bag of other really weird... Look at this one. Strange-sided 4-sided dice. This is the part of the show, folks, if you don't know, where I roll a die in this situation and you use your psychic powers at home to guess or divine what number's coming up. So I'm going to roll this one. There it is. It's got a rattle in it. And let's see if anybody can guess the number. What do I hear? What do I hear?
Yeah, I'm not going to predict it. I'm going to make a 5 happen, Richard.
5?
Oh, I'm not
Telekinesis.
Telekinesis.
2. I'm seeing 3s, 4s, people holding up their fingers. Ben Radford says 3. Carl Polish says 1. And I've got my dice rolling machine here. Here it comes. 6.
Congratulations, Newman.
6, verse number 6. Second roll. What do we have?
It's
going to explode.
5.
It's going to explode. I got to roll. I forgot to write it down. 6. There we go. And the next. Here comes the next one.
If it happened, you'd be really impressed.
And it's rolling, and it's settling on 4.
Yes.
4.
Rigged again.
Yeah.
I don't trust you.
Poor Susan.
I can't see that dice thing.
Last number coming up.
Got a 5 in there. I know it.
Last number coming up. And
5 on there.
Susan says 5. We got lots of numbers, and it is. 5. At last, for Susan Gerbic, it's a 5. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.